It's your girl, Michelle, with Girls Talk Real Talk, because when girls and guys talk, information is disseminated. Today, we have a very special guest. Matter of fact, I want to say that he is my very first celebrity guest that I have had on the show. So I am going to let him totally introduce himself. So Lawrence, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Hey everyone, thanks for having me, Michelle, on Girls Talk Real Talk. My name is Lawrence Chau, C-H-A-U. I think in North America, I'm most known as the host of the paranormal show, Ghostly Encounters. That's me, guys. It's still airing on, I think, Destination America and on Amazon Prime. You can get it, and other places around the world, actually. My latest claim to fame is a short film that I did called Justice for Vincent, which has won about 35 awards on the film festival circuit. We'll talk about that later, but it's a powerful social justice short film. Very timely, given the rise of Asian xenophobia during the pandemic. And in Asia, I was known as the Ryan Seacrest of Singapore. I had an entertainment news show called Showbuzz, and we would interview stars from around the world, and I would travel the world and interview Halle Berry and Denzel Washington, Tom Hanks, and George Clooney, and Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey. So those were the good old days, going back in my past life. And as the host, as one of the premier hosts in Singapore, I also hosted specials like Miss Singapore Universe. I was also the series host of Hollywood Square Singapore, and I got to act on the side and things like that. But right now, I'm based in Los Angeles, and I'm an actor, I'm a TV host, I'm a writer, and a producer. And I'm very tired.
See, you're very busy man.
Aren't we all? You know the drill. Media.
Yeah, I do.
We don't.
I know the drill.
Media. It's a slugfest.
Well, yeah, we get in there, but some aspects of it we love, or we wouldn't still be in there.
We love this, the connecting with people and dialogue.
Yeah, that's the best part of it. So I want to jump right in, Lawrence, and I want to begin talking about, because when I was checking out your credits and the things that you were doing, I mean, you've got 21 credits as an actor and 11 credits as a writer and 5 credits as a producer. And so you've got some things that are going on. But as you mentioned, one of the films that really stood out to me was Justice for Vincent.
Mm.
Let's take a minute and watch the trailer for Justice for Vincent.
$3,000 and 3 years probation.
Half the price of a shiny new car in the Motor City.
Is that what the life of a Chinese man, an American citizen, is worth?
How did you get started with that picture? How did you get involved with it?
Well, Justice for Vincent, I call it JFV for short, is inspired by a true story. The true story being the brutal murder of a Chinese American citizen named Vincent Chin. He was bludgeoned to death with a baseball bat by 2 disenfranchised auto workers in Detroit, 1982. This was at the time when the so-called Japanese auto invasion was compromising the Detroit automotive industry. So racial tensions were high, as well as economic tensions. And what happened was 2 Caucasian auto workers got into a bar brawl with an Asian Chinese guy, Vincent Chin, and it was revealed that they mistook him for being Japanese. And the bar brawl escalated, and eventually Vincent was killed by the father and stepson. And it was a story that resonated back in the 80s because it galvanized what's believed to be the largest Asian American civil rights movement. Prior to that, we've been a very quiet community, docile, passive, and this injustice ripped through the community, and it galvanized community leaders, and for the first time, all pockets of the Asian communities, Chinese Americans, Japanese Americans, Korean Americans, et cetera, to come together.
This was not justice, but there wasn't an organization that existed to stand up and say, this is wrong. What began out of that was meetings that started with 4 people, 10 people, 20 people, 100 people, and people were talking about what can we do, what can we do, what can we do? I raised my hand and I said, the world wants to know how the Asian American community feels about this.
In depth, Vincent Chin inspired protest marches, rallies, dinners, banquets.
The killing of Vincent Chin is probably the most tragic example of the kind of violence that's being committed against Asians.
For Asian Americans, Vincent Chin's murder symbolized an extreme example of the kind of discrimination that they'd face. It becomes a rallying point for Asian Americans to be able to say, that's me too.
It's strange because I wrote the script around 2016, post-election, just because I saw this rise of hate in the country that really bothered me. And for me, as a writer, it was an anti-hate message. I didn't know that a few years later, we filmed it in 2018, and I traveled the film festival circuit from 2018 to about 2020. I didn't know that COVID would hit. And COVID, as you know, hit in December 2020, is it 2019, sorry, into 2020. And that sparked a lot of Asian xenophobia. And the themes were just so coincidental and eerily so. And I have to, people go, how did you know? How did you know? How did you foreshadow? I go, I didn't. And it's a sad foreshadowing, to think. For me, when we first did JFV, it was just a personal message of anti-hate. And at the end of the film, we paid tribute to other hate crime victims like Trayvon Martin, Matthew Shepard, and Breonna Taylor. And I just re-edited to include George Floyd and the victims of the Atlanta shootings recently because of allegedly COVID and Asian racism. So it kind of all tied in. And we put out this little film and just garnered a lot of attention and won a lot of awards, and it really resonated. It was just eerily timely. So that's Justice for Vincent. And not only did I write it, I produced it and I acted in it as well. I played one of the civil rights activists in the case, and there were quite a few of them. So it's a moving piece. I'm glad you got to see it. We're looking at distribution right now, so I'll keep you posted, or you just visit my website, jfvfilm.com, jfvfilm.com. I should enunciate better. I'm a TV host.
Well, I thought that it was important that we bring this up during our conversation because of the Asian phobia that we are still really in the midst of, because the pandemic is not over. Speaking of that, with all of the stories and the things that have transpired between other races and the Asian race, how is that community, how are you seeing that community receiving that and rebounding from what they are enduring at this time? Because at the beginning of the pandemic, the Asian community was really under siege.
Yes. I'm glad you took notice. A lot of people aren't aware. Mainstream media didn't cover it that much until much later. But I was on the pulse of those hate crimes when they first started, and they were horrible. You know, we're looking at senior citizens being stompled on, attacked from behind, knocked out. People my age riding subways and getting accosted, and you know, if you go on YouTube, being sprayed on by Febreze or Lysol or whatever, kids being taunted at school and playgrounds, and it's very unsettling. And I mean, and racists, or they don't even care if you're Chinese or not, you know. But we can get into the whole xenophobia with regards to disease in a second. But I think the Asian community has long been scapegoated. You know, like I said, in our film JFV, it was the automotive industry in the 80s. And prior to that, it was, working on the railroad, and you know, we've always been identified as easy, docile, passive scapegoats for whether it was for economic hardship or whether it was because of disease, rightly or wrongly so, mostly wrongly. You know, I mean, you go back in time, there are rat poison packages with Asian faces on, or Chinamen with a tail, and that's how we were pictured, which is very unfortunate. But back to your question, I think I don't think there's been enough outcry from other ethnic groups. I think the Asian community has once again come together and has been very vocal, and we've seen legislation passed in Congress to protect Asians and denounce Asian hate crimes, which is good. I would like to see members of other ethnic communities have come to our defense, or and have a say about it, because it just came. COVID struck when George Floyd was killed, and subsequent, quite a number of African Americans were victims of police brutality, shootings, or places of worship were under siege. The Asian community did come to, what's the right word, in alignment with the African American community, which is wonderful. I protested, I marched in the streets, and I would like to see some reciprocation in that regard. So not just from the African American community, but other communities and things like that, because my greatest fear is that there are forces in the country and overseas that want to see this racial conflict in America. They want to see us tear each other apart. Racists get off on this. I mean, it's one thing to have, say, white people hating on black people, or white people hating on Asian people, but then for them to see, okay, well, let's see African American people hate on Asian people, and Hispanic people hate on Asian people, and vice versa. I think that's like music to their ears, which is worse. So my personal position is that you solve problems by coming together. Unity is really the answer, as is compassion, whether it is racial injustice or a pandemic or economic instability. You come together. If you continue to tear each other apart, who wins? The people that hate you, or enemy states that want to see America fall apart through racial conflict. So that's my personal position.
Well, I think it's important that we look at that, because I know I saw it in the beginning. I saw it right when, I think the very first story that I saw was an elderly Asian woman that was on one of the subways in New York.
Mm.
And she got knocked down.
Yeah.
And somebody told her to go back to where she came from.
Right.
And she asked the question, well, where am I supposed to go? I'm from here.
Yeah.
And so it was almost as if we stepped into that arena and you began to get the ability to see, to hear, and to witness everything that was happening at the time. And not because I think it was because people just needed someone to blame, but it was because of the fear. It was the fear that we were entering into an arena, country and worldwide, that nobody had an answer to, that nobody could figure out what this needs to look like. And so now the fear, and then with the misinformation, I'll say, that came out, that it came from China, it just made the situation profoundly worse.
Yeah, I think you're right. Fear is definitely a major component. Economic hardship as a result of the pandemic is another component. I just can't help but wonder, is racism going to be the knee-jerk reaction for every major crisis that we now encounter? What if another pandemic hits from another country, or, are we going to start hating on them? Is everyone is that going to be the go-to answer, which is not an answer? Can you pause and think about if it was during the AIDS crisis, if suddenly people started to beat up gay people or African American people because it came allegedly from Africa? Can you imagine? Or what about other things, Ebola or MERS from the Middle East? There's so many things in our past we did not react this way. So I don't know, it's very disconcerting. I think we've entered into an age of racial strife and tension where it's been legitimized to hate. Mm-hmm. And we can get as political as we want, or maybe not, but I think you know where I'm coming from, that when someone creates an environment where it's okay to demonize, make fun of a race, a certain kind of people, then it filters down and it grants permission. Not only does it grant permission to think and feel it, but it grants a very disturbing permission to act on it through violence. And to me, that is very disturbing and disheartening. And, I come into this world, and throughout my life, when I see injustice, let's be specific and say, racial injustice or injustice against the LGBT community, things like that. It's, to me, and that was the message of Justice for Vincent, the injustice is injustice. Hate is hate. A mother's loss is a mother's loss, whether it's a racial thing or LGBT hate crime, whatever. That was our message. And I ended the film with people coming together from all walks of life. Hopefully, that's how we resolve every crisis that we encounter, is by coming together in a spirit of compassion and understanding. I mean, you think about it. What does attacking an elderly Asian man, whether they're born here or they're an immigrant, and blaming them for COVID, or blaming every Asian for COVID, how does that solve the pandemic? Like, it doesn't make sense. The virus is a virus. You have to use science to combat the virus. And there we go. So
I think for the most part, it began to show, I know for me, I can't speak for anyone else, but for me and the circle and the community of people that I talk to, what it really showed us is that when you have people in power that are creating scenarios that are not conducive to cohesiveness and coming together, but that is spewing hate and separation
And superiority.
That what begins to happen is people begin that are not comfortable in who they are and are looking for a reason to make them feel more superior than what they are, then they will act on that as if it's given them permission to step into that platform.
Yeah.
And I think the culture in which we were living in at the time was ripe for the picking, so to speak. It was a perfect storm for the things that transpired to happen the way they did. And what it did is now it has people that were never talking about it. Now they're talking about it.
Yeah.
People that never voiced an opinion about it is now voicing an opinion about it. Yeah. And now people are seeing that there really is an issue in America about racism. And it's not designated to one race.
No.
We have an issue overall with racism.
And that I agree. And I was like, if they're tearing down one demographic, that is concern for other demographics. That's people of color, for example. If they are hating on Black people, that is cause concern for the Hispanic community, as it is for the Asian community, or the Jewish community, or the LGBTQ community. And we saw it after the 2016 election. It was like a list. Let's African Americans, Hispanics, Middle East, Easterners, Jewish. I thought, okay, we're next. And that's why I was motivated to do our film. And I think I hope people recognize that there's the commonality. When one racial group is under attack, it really opens the gateway to attack other racial groups. And, if you become complacent, you will pay the price as a society. And I think you have to overcome it by coming together. Hopefully. And I don't understand this fear. It's kind of like, is it real? Is it not? Okay, the demographic of America is changing and people are threatened. Is our way of life going to change? Are our values going to change? The mosaic, the color of our communities are changing, but I don't. It's like, what are we up to? No one's going to come out and destroy your way of life. No one's after. It's hard to say. It could balloon into a whole bunch of tangents, but I don't know. Let's stay focused. So.
Well, I wanted to go back because there was an interesting fact that you mentioned earlier that I want to bring up again, is that the 1982 murder of Vincent Chin was actually the very first federal civil rights trial
that ever
happened in America concerning Asian Americans.
You're the first person who's ever brought this up, so you really did your homework. So I'm impressed. Yes. It was under the Bush administration, Reagan Bush, I think. But the Department of Justice. Okay, what happened was the Asian civil rights movement put pressure on the federal government to pursue a federal civil rights case because the state case let them off with the $3,000 fine and 3-year probation. That was their punishment for murdering a Chinese American citizen. And to the Asian communities, is that what the life of a Chinese man is worth? $3,000? So the purpose of the movement was to apply pressure on the federal government to pursue a civil case, a federal civil case, where human rights violation and racism were the crux of the case. And you're right, the DOJ didn't want to touch the case at the time. And it was the first time, there was even debate in Congress as to whether a Chinese American was eligible to be safeguarded by the Civil Rights Act. No, it was complicated because Vincent Chin was an immigrant. He immigrated when he was a child. and was a Chinese immigrant eligible for federal protections. So it was a very contentious case. And, it's interesting. At the time, I know the civil rights activists, I've met with them, they did reach out to the African American community for support. And there was even mixed reaction. Like, it was almost like, well, you guys were always passive and docile. You never came up to defend us, so why should we help you? And it was actually Jesse Jackson who came to the call. And he appeared at rallies, and he galvanized the African American support, which we are grateful for. But it had because this case was so difficult. It was the first ever. It was so historic in that respect. And Asian community, the Chinese have been here for 200 years since railroads, and our history is rarely ever told. The racism and the injustices we faced from, not even being allowed to, grow our own vegetables or get medical treatment, to not being allowed to open up businesses or vote or bring wives over, or being imposed with head taxes if we wanted to bring over family, things like that. And it's never really told in history in school. It's rarely shown in entertainment. I applaud the African American community because, you guys, you moxie, you come together and you put it out there and you are forced to be reckoned with. The Vincent Chin case was probably the first time that the Asian community showed a similar kind of moxie. And now I think with the Asian xenophobia, it's happening again. And we've evolved. We're not so passive anymore. And we also have people in Congress now who are speaking out. So times have changed, but sadly, the racism hasn't really. It just takes one crisis and we're full circle back to where we were 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 50 years ago. It's sad. It's very sad. How we evolved as a society, I don't get it. I really don't get it. And I think there are some forces that like it that way. They like the conflict. They like, suppression, oppression. And then there's the other side that wants unity and advancement and equality. And that's the tug of war of society, isn't it? My fear is that all the steps we've gained throughout the decades, are we going back in time? Are we losing those hard fought battles and strides? I tell my friends, the Civil Rights Act, because of the blood, sweat, and toil by the African American community, that other minority groups get to benefit from, as well as the LGBT community. I mean, people need to know their history. But my point of that is that it's the coming together and standing up for one another that eventually you can invoke the change for a more cohesive, harmonious society. So that's my soliloquy. Holy crap.
Well, I think it's important because I'm a firm believer that you cannot fix what you don't recognize. And I kind of feel like we're in a position now to where it's coming up. So now we've got to deal with it. And I believe that the generation, I've got a 25-year-old son, and his generation, I really believe, are the ones that are about to make a change, because they're not accepting the status quo. They're not accepting that this is how it's always been done, so this is how it's always going to be done, and nobody's going to change it. Because even from him, he tells me that, well, that don't work for me. So we're going to have to figure out another way to do this because that's not working for me. And I think with this generation of young people, and especially with the George Floyd thing, and then with the Asian racism that is going on, they are noticing these things and they're starting to learn how to speak out. They're developing a voice. And I think that that's so important because when I was growing up, we just kind of went on our parents, coattails and enjoyed everything that was going on and all was good and there was no problems and all of that. But now it's reintroduced itself. And so now we have to do something about it. And so we can no longer remain quiet. We have to speak up.
Yeah, I do think the new generation is different. Thank God. More evolved. It's interesting because it's hard to say, because I think the African American community has always been more vocal, and whereas the Asian community has been more docile, has been more passive. You take your thing and you kind of just be quiet and go about, don't make waves. Mm-hmm. And I think we've managed to go under the radar for all these decades, until COVID hit. It's but you think about it, change doesn't occur. Change often occurs when there is huge social injustice. That's where the positive change comes from. If everything was smooth and perfect, nothing would change. It would be the status quo. It's unfortunate, but yeah, it takes these dark moments where we transition. But I think not only are people becoming more evolved and educated, but also, like you said, more active and proactive, and getting into positions of power. It's not powerful, but finally there's like a filmmaker putting his own money, getting people together to put out something with a message. If you left it up to the powers that be, it'll never it'll never happen.
Right.
So, and now we have people, a diverse people running for office, hopefully getting more promotions in companies and things like that. It takes a lot of uphill climbing and pushing that rock up the hill. It's a lot of toil. I just hope that the younger generation acknowledges the past. My fear is that as progressive as they are, I don't know how entrenched they are with the history. Because a lot of them don't like history, to be honest.
Well, I think that they're learning the history by default.
Yeah.
And the reason that I say it's by default is because you have to know where you've come from in order to know where you're going. And so with a lot of the conversations that are happening now and a lot of the activists that are raising up now, they've had to go back to the Martin Luther King time. They've had to go back to the 70s. They've had to go back to the Black Panther movement. And they've had to research what they did. Take what worked and release what didn't, so that they can begin to affect change. I
hope so. I think you're right. I mean, it's not just social issues, but even look at entertainment, right? You have a very thriving hip hop community, but do you remember Motown? The first Black music record label that broke down the barriers, and before them, the toil of Josephine Baker and Billie Holiday and Dorothy Dandridge, Eartha Kitt. I hope people delve into that history. I don't know. History is very important. I mean, I was one of those rare Asian Canadian kids who actually, dug into the history books and read up about, the Chinese massacre in America, and they had taxes and the exclusion acts, the immigration exclusion acts against Chinese, and et cetera, et cetera.
So what else do you have coming up that's in the mix You know,
I'm actually writing, nothing exciting. I actually made a conscious decision to not jump into the front lines again, and do acting and hosting stuff. I needed a break because it was an intense film festival. Film festivals are grueling. Yeah, I mean, we were lucky because we did it right before COVID, and festivals were still on and in person, and it was like every month I was traveling somewhere at 3 a.m. to some city, going to a festival and back and forth. It's exhausting. So and then COVID hit, and I said, you know what? I think this is a good time to actually just write. So I want to write more scripts and things like that. Maybe jump back into the front line as an actor host later on. So, there's a lot of people actually that are now trying to develop the Vincent Chin story into a TV series or a feature film. I would have loved to have done it, but these are like bigger fish to me being a small independent fish. So all the power to them. I wish them luck. I think it's a wonderful story that needs to be told. So yeah, I think, but we were the first. I think
it started with you.
We sparked that interest. But having said that, ours is inspired by adaptation. I think these other creative teams would do a more real life, factually accurate, to the T kind of project. So which is great. So I'm happy. I know some of them, so it's good.
Okay, that's good. So as we are hopefully coming out of this pandemic thing, and what all it looks like, I know that you said that you're doing more writing, but I also know that you've got a film that's in post-production.
Oh, Preacher 6 is a crazy sci-fi action horror thriller film. It's in post-production. I don't know what the status on that is. The trailer's on YouTube. Preacher 6. Check it out, guys. It looks pretty cool. Yeah, so life is, you never know what in show business, you never know what's gonna happen with your life. I mean, I'm a diversified talent. Like, I can write, I can produce, I can host, and I can act. So it's like you do whatever kind of the winds guide you, land in your lap. That's what you kind of pick up doing. So I don't know. I kind of do it all. It's a blessing and a curse.
So I really like sci-fi. Crazy as it sounds, I love sci-fi. Movies, TV shows, anything that is high octane and action, and then anything that is vampire and werewolf focused. Don't ask me why, just have always been there. But I noticed in The Preacher 6 that there's a lot of action. So what was it like, actually, because it's so futuristic in a sense, what was it like actually playing the part of the monk? What was that like?
Oh, I play a modern day monk. It was fine. I mean, you use a lot of imagination because the movements, they're going to be CGI'd or special effects and things like that. But it's not much different than just acting in, a normal film. But if you look at those big budget Marvel, sci-fi, action, superhero things, they're major, like the green screens, and everyone's they've got like electrical things for the computer to match their movements, and then they do their superhero things, and they have hardcore stunt coordinators and stunt people doing all the flips and whirls and wires, flying them up in the air. It's major behind the scenes production, and it's very specific because your movements have to be all choreographed and your hit has to land on a certain place, and so it's very specific in what you're doing. And while you're being physical, you also have to act, right? So, and you're also suited up in a very hot suit. You can't use the restroom. It's difficult work that they have to do. And it takes a long, it's very, very time consuming. Everything is so, too minute, like every detail. So what they go through, it takes them almost a year to like film an Avengers movie because it's so specific, very detail oriented. And then it goes into heavy post-production where they add in all, the effects and the backgrounds and explosions. It's a big deal. I have yet to get to that level. So stop making me look bad. You're asking me all these questions, make me look bad, girl.
No, people are going to see, because this is where you start from. You get to move up to that place. And trust me, I don't think it's going to be that long before we'll be hearing more things from you. And it won't be that. I don't think it'll be that long.
I hope so. Well, you're very kind. Thank you. Speaking of which, I hate to boast, but I just got this in the mail. We got another award for Justice for Vincent.
So which award is that?
This is a communicator award. We are a winner of distinction for Justice for Vincent in the area of social justice or social messages stores. And it's from Kansas, which is kind of shocking. I go, ooh.
Okay.
Kansas recognized that. The industry in Kansas recognized that. So
they recognized your work in social justice.
There you go. So
I'm excited because I noticed that you and the film had won several awards in regards to the message and the sentimentology of the movie. So I know that you're saying you're writing. Of course, you still have awards, seems like, coming in the mail to you just to remind you of the work that you've been doing and to keep you on track.
I think that's the last award. I think we're okay now. It was intense, man. Awards, publicity, traveling. I need to like chill out and go. Like, is that phone ringing? Don't pick it up. Is that social media? Don't click on it. Don't like. Just like go write. Go bury yourself and write. And then it's been a difficult. 2020 was a difficult year because I lost friends from COVID. Mm-hmm. And my brother unexpectedly had a heart attack and passed away in 2020, and he was quite young. So I had to take a lot of time off and deal with that. And so it was a difficult year. I lost about 3 or 4 close people. So I'm kind of coming out of it. Who knows what the Delta variant will do to the world. Hopefully it'll be short-lived, but I hope people get vaccinated. Oh shit, I shouldn't have brought that up.
I'm a firm believer that I don't like needles.
But if it's gonna save your life, take the needle.
My kids made sure that I got vaccinated. Mm-hmm. They were on a journey to make sure that I got vaccinated. And it didn't kill me.
No.
I'm still here.
Yeah.
But I want people to understand that, we may be laughing and enjoying each other in our conversation, but we often say that the life you save just might be your own. So when you make the decision, keep that in mind.
Yeah. 100%. I'm with you on that. I wish more people took the facts more seriously, as opposed to conspiracy theories and, nonsense. The facts are the facts. The science is the science. But I don't know. Yeah, it's a very.
Look, I've heard a little bit of everything.
It's like it's the only country like, where it's so controversial. I don't get it. I don't get it. It's so political. I don't get it. Like, vaccines have been around for their job is to help the body naturally boost its immune system to fight off these viruses. It's not 100% effective, but if it can help you potentially avoid getting hospitalized or dying, and also help prevent other people from getting infected, do it.
Natural progression. That seems natural. So as we come to a close of our conversation, Lawrence, is there anything that you would like to share with our listening and watching audience?
I just hope that we're still going, it's tough times. I think the fall is going to be tough again with the Delta variant. I just hope that we look out for one another on a level of compassion and understanding. And like I said before, it's unity that solves crises, not division. So thank you for having me.
You are more than welcome. I have enjoyed having this conversation with you and getting to know you.
Oh, thank you. Are we going for drinks now? Oh, we can. We're scheduled.
You're in one place, I'm in another place.
2022, I hope that this is all done with, this pandemic.
Well, that's the prayer.
Fingers crossed. Well, it's great talking to you, Michelle. Thank you so much. I wish you well.
Thank you.
And your family. Stay safe. Keep doing what you're doing. You got that spark.
Thank you. So everybody, this is your girl Michelle with Girls Talk Real Talk and our guest Lawrence. So we thank you for another wonderful conversation. Be sure to join in with us again next week for another awesome conversation with our guest. So we'll talk to you again later. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me.